Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Business and Nature webinar series, which we've launched in partnership with Salesforce. I'm Mairead Cahill. I'm the founder of Wonderoom, and we work with pioneering brands and businesses around the world to create and communicate nature positive impact individually and collectively. We're thrilled to be launching the series with Salesforce because we have a collective goal to really bring businesses together around business and nature. And the webinar series covers 5 of the biggest topics for business on nature right now. And today's episode is a brilliant one coming off the back of COP28, which is how to navigate nature impact and reporting in order to unlock real value. It's a subject that all of us are navigating, and businesses are at different stages of development on and in. And it's brilliant to have such a great group of speakers today representing very diverse businesses in terms of sectors and geographies. We have Emilio Tejedor from Iberdrola, Ankit Todi from the Mahindra Group, Julie Moorad from Salesforce, and Laura Palmeiro from Danone. And each will be sharing their own perspectives and learnings in terms of where they're at on the journey. And then we'll be moving to a really interactive Q&A where we really welcome everyone's questions. This is a very practical series, so we think sharing candid insights and learnings and having candid discussion as businesses and amongst businesses is really, really important. And what we would suggest, if everyone's happy with this, is that as attendees and those joining, if you want to add your questions as we go into the Q&A box, then when we come to the interactive discussion, we can pick those up. So feel free whenever a question comes to your mind to enter it straight into the Q&A box. If you have other observations or comments, please add those into the chat box. So if we can pull up just the first slide, Millie, where I'm going to share just a few context setting points to ground us in the session. So clearly we are seeing a real rise of mandatory reporting, particularly with the CSRD acting as a key driver and coming into force and required in 2024 for at least the first group and first set of larger companies, and with such big implications for companies that are operating in the EU. TNFD is of course voluntary, but expected to follow the same path as TCFD and to very likely be incorporated into the new ISSB sustainability standards as well. We know, and we've discussed this in previous episodes, that we're seeing a real increasing investor pressure on business to understand its nature and biodiversity risks, impacts, and dependencies at a deeper level than ever before. So it's really rising up the investor agenda. And of course, this is happening alongside already a lot that's required on the climate and net zero side. Of course, they're interrelated, but with slightly distinct different aspects when we look at this subject. We're then seeing, of course, the practical challenge of how to access the right data across the business value chain, and of course, how to manage it effectively. And not only is that requiring deep sort of internal alignment and collaboration, but also external collaboration within the value chain and supply chain, and more effective data solutions to manage. And I think we would sort of close this context setting with a positive note, which is that while nature reporting is of course complex, we know that we don't need to do it all at once, and that by prioritizing and starting with the key material areas of impact, that allows businesses to start on the journey and make progress, even in the absence of having the full picture. So I think with that in mind, we're going to move straight into our speakers, and we're starting with Emilio Tejedor, Head of Environment and Quality at Iberdrola. Over to you, Emilio.
Hey, hello, everybody. First of all, thank you for inviting me to the panel. And just wanted to introduce myself, as you just said, Mairead, is that I'm Emilio. I'm Head of Environment at Iberdrola. Iberdrola is a multinational power utility with multiple interests in multiple countries. So, I mean, I have prepared a few slides. So, Emily, if you want to go ahead with those. First of all, when looking at nature, I like to highlight how we approached our strategy on nature, our sustainability strategy. I mean, given that we are an energy company with traditional fossil fuels generation, climate is kind of a key impact with regards of nature. So we have a long term of action on climate transition to a renewable energy sector. So we had to add a number of two other legs to this sustainability strategy when we talking about nature is the biodiversity impacts and circularity plan as well. And this come in order of impact. I mean, first of all, climate is our highest impact, then comes biodiversity, and third would be circularity and all around innovation, which is critical. Next slide, please. So this is like a picture of our where we are in the value chain of the energy systems. And to make the long story short, we are everywhere. I mean, we are in the generation, transmission, and distribution, and then also in the services supply for customers. And you see in the picture where we are, our main countries of operation. We had other activities in smaller, mainly renewable in other countries, but basically on the Atlantic region, Spain and the UK in Europe, and the US, Mexico, and Brazil in America. And we're also starting lots of operations in Australia. So next slide, please. So if we're talking about nature and navigating, which is the goal of this panel, is we have to understand or start with what is it that we want to measure. And there are different things that we want to measure and different solutions for that. If you want to talk about the impacts on biodiversity, the drivers for biodiversity loss, and we talk more on the topic of biodiversity here, given that climate was kind of identify our key impact. So we're talking about looking at the whole value chain, and that would be like looking at an environmental footprint, and that will identify the different impacts of the different activities of the company throughout the value chain. That means also supply of materials, operations, and then the service provisioning. If we're talking about, for example, the actual impacts on biodiversity and how we can contribute to the global biodiversity framework, then we're talking about looking at ecosystems and services, that it's looking at our direct activities is where we are and what we are doing with regards of nature. That's when we developed our biodiversity strategy, and with our goal to be net positive on biodiversity by 2030, and created a biodiversity accounting framework. We handle all our impacts and dependencies and positive and negative actions to come with a balance. And if we want to look at how we depend and impact on nature, we have to look at the different ecosystem services. That's when the natural capital assessments are handy, I mean, and provide very useful information. So all of these can be reported. My final comment would be, and if we go to the next slide, you can see that we have created reports for each and every of those aspects. For example, I mean, the sustainability report is kind of the key one, but there are other. I would suggest, well, I'll leave my comments to the Q&A session. So I'll leave it here. I think I'm on time.
Thank you so much, Emilio. And now we're going to move over to Ankit Todi, who's the lead on sustainability strategy and partnerships at Mahindra Group.
Thank you, Mairead, and thank you for hosting me. So I'll keep this very brief. Let me start by very quickly introducing what is the Mahindra Group. And Millie, if you could just bring the slides over. So the Mahindra Group is actually a large Indian conglomerate, roughly $50 billion in size, based out of India. The other thing that distinguishes us is that we are not present in one single industry, but are present in a variety of different industries. So right from manufacturing in the auto and farm sector, one of the world's largest manufacturers of tractors, to being present in the service industry, right from IT services to financial services, variety of other sectors such as hospitality, where we have a lot of resorts across the country and even globally, logistics, real estate, and a number of other small sectors. What this presents is that when you are present in such a diverse set of industries, how do you bring the nature conversation front and center on the CEO table? The other challenge is that the impact that these variety of industries have on the external environment is also quite different. So in some cases, such as the farm sector, there's a much more direct connect, or for that matter, the hospitality sector, where most of the resorts are actually located in biodiverse region. The connect is much stronger, but may not be the same in many other sectors. So as a result, one of the things that we did, and if I quickly move to the next page, is that we actually came together with what I like to call a common maximum program in terms of the priority areas of focus that we want to drive across the entire group. And we said that the first set of activities are things where you have very high degree of operational control. So everything to do with emissions, waste, water, material circularity, that's something that we'll drive. The second is where you have a high degree of influence in terms of moving the industry's conversation forward. So let's say green resorts is an example. That we are focusing on green buildings or green infrastructure in general, EVs, etc. What we do with the supply chain. So that's the second pillar. And the third pillar that we very consciously chose was where nature and social dimension intersects with each other. So how do we undertake activities at scale where we are able to both move the nature conversation forward, but at the same time also involve the larger community in place. And there particularly, I'll focus on points 7 and 8 that you see on the slide. So given our huge presence in the farm sector, one of the things that we are promoting very actively and completely as a non-profit, non-commercial initiative is to get the farming community in India to practice more sustainable agriculture, and also promoting concepts of agroforestry and different kinds of crops. That's one scale program. The second scale program that we have been undertaking is more focused on afforestation and restoration. So this is a program that has been around for more than 15 years now. We've planted about 24 million trees and counting. The aim is to further scale it up to about 7 to 8 million trees a year. So that's sort of the second program. And the third is that wherever in all the other physical locations where we have large influence on the land area that we control, we want to make sure that we play a positive role in terms of the biodiversity impact on the local community. It could be through, creating water bodies. It could be through plantation. It could be just letting the, natural biodiversity survive. The other couple of points that I make is that the entire reporting and disclosure ecosystem related to biodiversity is something that has been evolving quite actively. So we have been in touch with a wide variety of global organizations to understand what more can we do. Because as of now, most of the things that we do are more focused on action, but we may not necessarily be, putting together a TCFN lens or any of these global reporting and disclosure lens. So that's something that we are exploring. The other thing that we are trying to explore internally is that how do you make a stronger business case for investing in nature? So I'll take specifically the example of our Mahindra holidays and resorts business, which is where we have about 100 different resorts, mostly in biodiverse regions in the country. So thereby involving the customers that visit these resorts and creating means for them to engage with nature. So let's say we have a couple of resorts where we have piloted something called a butterfly park, where you can actually go around and interact with the insects, butterflies, and the general rich flora and fauna of that ecosystem. So we are trying to explore more such opportunities where you can actually create a business case for this that ensures that the kind of dollars that we can invest scale up quite a bit. So I think that's the two themes of focus that across all the work that we are doing, we are just bringing in that lens of business case on how do you scale the impact further. Happy to share more, but maybe I'll pause here for the time being. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you so much, Ankit. That's brilliant. And yeah, over to Julie Moorad, Senior Manager on Global Climate Action and Nature at Salesforce.
Nice to be with you all today. I'm joining Mairead in the studio, so you might recognize a similar background behind us. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you all because it's the one that I'm having most frequently with peers and at conferences I attend. So it's great to talk about this in this kind of forum. Millie, if you bring up my slide, that'll help contextualize things a bit. So at Salesforce, if you've tuned into this series, you'll have seen this slide before, but we have a nature positive strategy, and that nature positive strategy is really complementary to and part of our broader sustainability strategy. And we did this and brought nature into the forefront like this, recognizing the role that nature plays within our operations, but also understanding that business impact and dependency when it comes to nature, but that there are plenty of opportunities as well. So this time last year, we didn't have this strategy done. We were building it. And we wanted to make sure we leveraged best practice guidance, but also go beyond that and think about where can Salesforce have an outsized impact given what we can uniquely contribute as a company. So we did benchmarking, we did interviews with stakeholders, but we also wanted to confirm some assumptions we had around our impacts and dependencies on nature, which led us to use the TNFD beta guidance that was out at the time. So Millie, if you go to the next slide, I can talk about how that work fits into our broader strategy. And it really fits in with that last pillar, or first pillar, sorry, on the previous slide, which is reducing our nature impacts. In order to get to the point that we knew that was a critical component of our strategy, we needed to have a better understanding of what those impacts and dependencies were. So we started our TNFD assessment. Goals of doing that were to uncover our risks, opportunities, impacts, and dependencies, and also contribute to the development of the TNFD framework on the whole, because we knew that would have a significant impact on our customers, as well as the broader business community. So we gave a lot of feedback during the pilot process. So in doing the assessment, we looked at our direct operations, high priority categories for upstream value chain, so our suppliers, as well as select sectors downstream that make up our customer base. And we walked away with a much stronger understanding of those impacts. What we revealed was that the majority of our risks and opportunities for Salesforce lie in our upstream and downstream value chain, so not within our direct operations, which we had kind of had a feeling would be the case given our business model, but it was great to get that confirmation. We also uncovered our risks. So as a technology company, it wasn't necessarily surprising that water scarcity was our largest nature-related risk, as it's used in cooling of data centers, but we got a much more granular understanding of where those risks existed. And then it was also really fascinating in the process to learn a little bit more about how those risks were being managed on a site level with some of our suppliers already, and pleasantly surprised to hear that those risks were being accounted for. But ultimately, we learned a lot in this process, but it helped us to unlock a lot of value as an organization. And it's not just data that we got, although I think that's the first thing I would say we got from doing this assessment. We got much higher quality data on those impacts and dependencies, which is critical to advancing those conversations and action internally. As Ankit was saying, building that business case, that this data really helped us to do that. But second, we were able to come up with a kind of, I'm going to actually flip the order I have on the screen here, but we confirmed where we should focus our efforts. So upstream and downstream, we know are going to be the best use of our time, resources, and energy. And then lastly, we were able to create a short list of actions to ensure that our strategy was robust and credible. So we got a lot more clarity on those material impacts, which is where we're going to be focusing and have been focusing our efforts since our strategy was published. We're in the midst of working on what this looks like, but it's things like developing our perspective and program around water stewardship, closing data gaps that we had so that we know we're actually working from the best information, but we wouldn't have known those data gaps existed had we not gone through the assessment. We've been developing work plans with our internal stakeholders using that data as conversation starters. So that's with procurement, real estate, and infrastructure. And of course, we've been able to dive headfirst into those opportunities. So thinking about how we can support our customers, whether it's through series like this and kind of sharing some of our learnings along our journey, or talking directly to our customers around what their product needs would be from us. So I think fundamentally, this assessment and process of looking at those impacts was a great door opener for us, but has also really helped us to raise that collective understanding of what are we talking about when we talk about nature at Salesforce. This is a really grounding tool to do that. So I'll leave it there, but eager to answer any questions that folks have.
Thank you so much, Julie. And now over to Laura Palmeiro, Sustainable Finance Director at Danone. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, hello to everyone. So my name is Laura. I'm head of sustainable finance at Danone. I have been working for 26 years in Danone, many years, first in the finance department. I'm an accountant, in fact, and then in sustainability metrics since 2009. I just wanted, if we go to the first slide, I just wanted to very quickly show you the framework that we have, which is our three main pillars of sustainability. We have something very special in Danone that comes directly from our conviction and our mission of the company, which is to bring health through food to as many people as possible. And so therefore, when we present our sustainability agenda, we have three pillars, which are nature, people and communities, usually called as a social side, but we have something that is quite unique. And it is, I would say, our main pillar in our company, which is health through food, so the health pillar. And this is by taking care of about the profile, the nutritional profile of our products, because we are only present in healthy categories with very little exceptions, and it is something that we take extremely seriously. Of course, today it is all about nature, so I'm going to do a little focus on nature, our nature pillar, and how we are planning to preserve and regenerate nature through our business. So if we go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to share with you in more details which are our plans in this arena. So first of all, of course, because we are a company that totally relies on agriculture, because we're selling food, obviously. First of all, we have the GHG emissions that we have submitted last year. We are one of the only two companies that submitted last year the new targets according to FLAG, which is Forest, Land and Agriculture. Within the SBTi, there has been a specific working group in order to create this specific guidance. And we have been pilots there. We have been contributing to the working group. So we have just submitted them last year. And then, of course, with a commitment to net zero by 2050. Also, very importantly, around 50% of our total CO2 equivalent emissions are coming from milk. Therefore, we have to make heavy commitments on methane that are related to the milk industry. And we're targeting 30% reduction by 2030 of this. Then, of course, we are, even if it is very, very small for our business, only 3 to 4%, we are looking into 30% improvement in energy efficiency by 2025, and we're very well on track to deliver these targets. Then, of course, another big pillar for us is regenerative agriculture, and there has been already some mentions about that by other fellow presenters today. We want to lead the way for regenerative dairy farming models in this. And so we are committing to having 30% of the key ingredients that we source directly to be coming from farms that have begun to transition to regenerative agriculture practices by 2025. Also, we have committed to zero deforestation and conversion on our key commodities by 2025. Then another topic that is extremely important for us, as you can imagine, is water. And so we commit to preserve and restore the watersheds where we operate. So this is we're not only talking about the watersheds that feed in a certain way our water business, because we have a mineral water division, but all of our operations, including the dairy operations, and to have a water footprint reduction across of our value chain. So we are committing to the 4 Rs, approach that we have deployed that we will have deployed in all our production sites by 2030. And we are committing to a watershed preservation and restoration plans in highly water-stressed areas by 2030. Also, we are driving transition to a circular and low-carbon packaging system and recover as much as we use. So we are committing to 100% of reusable, recyclable, or compostable by 2030 of our packaging materials, to have the use of the virgin fossil-based packaging by 2040, with a 30% reduction by 2030, accelerating reuse and recycled materials, of course, and then lead to the development of effective collection systems to recover as much plastic as we use by 2040. And for this, but this is I would say a transversal topic for all of our agenda, not only for nature, but for the other topics. We cannot do it alone. So the presence here of the SDG 17, which is together with partners, is pretty much everywhere. And finally, to cut waste across the value chain, and to have all the food waste not fit for human use, animal consumption, or biomaterial processing by 2030. So this is very quickly our agenda, our main targets for the nature pillar. And I think I will leave the rest for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. If we could now, we'll be moving to interactive Q&A. We've been noticing some questions coming through on the Q&A box, which of course we're going to be picking up now. But if there's others, please do add them in. This is the time for it. And we have a good chunk of time to actually have more of an interactive discussion. So I think there's one I'd like to pick up, which Carl mentioned, which was for Emilio. And I'd like to build on that question a little bit, because Carl's asking about what exactly does a net positive nature strategy look like on the ground, and how does it translate in practical terms? I think I'd like to build on that a little bit, if I may. I thought that what was really interesting in what you shared, Emilio, was linking the goal of the Global Biodiversity Framework to you then expressing a net positive on biodiversity goal for 2030, supported by a biodiversity accounting framework. But indeed, I think what Carl's pointing to there, and I think many of us are curious on, is what perhaps does that net positive on biodiversity goal for 2030 look like? And then what might be the connection then through to how you think about that from a data and reporting perspective?
Well, yeah, nature positiveness is a tough matter, and some say it's an impossible task rather than aspirational. We all have to contribute to a nature positive world. It's very unlikely that a single entity can achieve nature positiveness, because nature is everything. It's climate, it's biodiversity, and it's also natural capital. So it's hard to claim nature positiveness, depending on how you word it. Anyway, talking about practical matters, I would suggest that it's one of the entities, companies, whoever wants to get into understanding interactions with nature and their impacts and such, start with a materiality assessment. Materiality not only on impacts and dependencies, but also where in the value chain those material impacts and dependencies are. Some companies will have their key impacts on the supply chain, for example. Others will have their key impacts in their own operations. Of course, we all have impacts everywhere, but I mean, I would suggest that we concentrate first on the key elements, and that is not so hard to assess and understand where you are. I mean, so that's a starting point, your journey. TNFD looks like a fantastic tool to start also these assessments. I mean, they give you like a set of steps that you need to follow in order to understand all of these. And I would suggest as well that if you're starting with TNFD, that will be very helpful to comply with CSRD and other reporting schemes that are coming, that also you keep focused on your key elements and not to, try to fine tune the last detail of everything you want to look into. How do you translate that into practical projects and things? I mean, once you set a goal, a corporate goal in a company like Iberdrola and similar, when you are in a big company, those goals, they have to be, backed by the CEO and the management board. That's critical, and that would be cascaded downstream into the operations of the company. And you have to make sure that you define smaller goals for each of the different departments of the company. In particular, the biodiversity goal that we put together to become positive on biodiversity by 2030, that translates into understanding our impacts on ecosystems that would come from our land use change. That means when we build something, we are changing the land, the use of land where we're building that infrastructure. So understanding those impacts and then quantifying them and developing an action plan to restore an equivalent area. And we were talking about species, which is the other key impact on biodiversity for us. Similarly, we need to understand what the impacts on species are. What is the importance of those species? Are they endangered? Are they not? That will drive also an action plan that could, talking about nature, we are looking, we started a year ago, a little over a year ago. We are feeling now that nature, talking about nature and a single asset is also too restrictive. Maybe we are looking more at a countrywide scope of work, because we have our assets distributed throughout the countries. So we can do programs that address our impacts on species and even ecosystems as well, with broader programs. So, and those are the ones that drive, and this accounting system, this accounting framework will enable us to at the end of the day say where we are. Are we negative in the scales? Are we balanced? Are we positive? And so, because we are going to account like for like basis. So nature, we don't want to compensate ecosystems with species, or a forest with a wetland, or an eagle with cactus. I don't know. No, it's going to be a like for like. And this accounting system will enable us to work on top of those results.
Really interesting. Thank you, Emilio. I think that's broadened it out a lot. And I think building on some of the discussion we had, if I turn to you now, Laura, I think that when we were speaking in the pre-brief ahead of this webinar, you shared quite an interesting internal way in which you're organized at Danone in order to really allow your reporting and data management to be as effective as possible by connecting it deeply with finance, which I think is really quite progressive. Do you want to share a little bit more about how you're organized? Because it's something that I think you feel is a way in which you're organized for success as well at Danone around this subject.
Yes, thank you. So this, I think in Danone, it came very naturally when we started accounting for this kind of effects. They needed someone that was in finance because of the competencies, but that was motivated enough in order to start accounting for stuff that were not euros or pounds or dollars. And that's how they asked me to join the team in 2009. And so all the connection with finance was done in a very organic and natural way, because I was a finance guy in the middle of other challenges and trying to put some order in all these figures in a world that at that time, at least, it was very approximative. And even if today, and I'm pretty sure that my homologues in other companies will agree with me, even if today we put out figures and they are audited and everything, the level of accuracy that we have in these topics intrinsically cannot be the same where we stand today as compared to what we have in finance, where we have an invoice with a number there and it is proof enough. So we're dealing with very complex topics here. So coming from finance and seeing all this, I ended up after a long journey, including my team, sustainability, so sustainable finance, so at that time it wasn't sustainable finance, but including this team that is doing all the metrics and all the reporting into the big finance team. So today I am reporting directly to our CFO of the company. And I think it is important internally. I will give a few words about how do we get organized internally to make it work, but also it gives a very good, I think a very serious signal externally in the company, because it means that our CFO is understanding the importance of the accuracy, the disclosures, and the legal aspects of this revolution around sustainability metrics that is coming, especially in Europe. So I think that Emilio and myself, we have something in common here with a CSRD coming, which is a big topic for us. And so we need to make sure that it is taken very seriously and with as much as accuracy and level of decision making and level of seniority of the governance of these topics inside of the company. And to finish with a word about this, I could speak for an hour about how we get organized, but what is important is to keep in mind that we're trying to include sustainability metrics in pretty much all of the decision-making processes of the company. Because if we want to achieve our target, whichever targets they are, be them nature, social, or health, we need to make sure that every CapEx, every big launch of a new product, and every other major decision that is made in the company is contributing to those targets and is not detrimental to those targets. And so we are flooding with this data, with asking for this data for every decision making. And that is where we can link to some of the questions that I have seen in the Q&A. And I totally agree with those kind of questions, which is, what about data? We will need a lot of data, and we will need a lot of systems in order to manage all this data. In comparison, if you look at what has been done for decades in finance, today we don't have that kind of tools, and we have almost the same level of requirements as in finance. So there is a cruel lack of that kind of tools today in the companies as we speak. And this is a fantastic opportunity for our IT companies out there. So a little sign for one of the speakers today.
Thank you. And really interesting, Laura, and I think that alignment internally and how that's done obviously super sets you up essentially for success, and then the integration into broader performance across the business and decision making. Picking up on Janet's question, because it is for you and links to what we've just been talking about, is that does Danone now budget for climate related production costs, given particularly she refers in the question above to the fact that we've seen extreme weather in recent years, which of course will have affected Danone's agricultural operations as many others. So that budgeting question is certainly in your ballpark. So would you like to respond to that? Thank you.
Yes, of course. So yes and no. In fact, it is not that we have kind of a line or something in our approach, in our budgeting process that says, okay, now this is the normal price, and this is extra for, I don't know, a provision or something in case something happens or something like that. It is not the approach that we do. The approach that we do is, and I think that other major companies are doing this, is through the mitigation, through what are the plans that we are putting in place on the field in order to mitigate this. For instance, typically we are investing a lot of money, but mostly a lot of effort from our teams that have a big and deep understanding of agricultural practices, to work directly with our farmers. We have direct connection with thousands of farmers around the world that go from big companies and big cooperatives in the US with 10,000 cows to families in Morocco that have 5 cows, and they live out of that. So very different, I would say, models of farming. And we're working directly with most of them, creating practices towards regenerative agriculture. And that enables us to prevent these risks. That enables us to help with on many aspects. It is a 360-degree approach that we have with this kind of projects, because it increases the yield of cows, the animal welfare, less costs in terms of veterinary, more profits for the farmers, etc., etc. And it also mitigates this kind of extreme weather risk. So we are doing it in that sense. Yes,
Laura.
we are including this in our business.
Thanks, Laura. That's great. And building on that, actually turning to Julie now, I think you made a really interesting reflection and point about how by doing the assessment on your impacts, risks, and dependencies, it allowed greater line of sight across the business and also informed decisions in quite a diverse set of ways. And perhaps we can also pick up on the deep sea moratorium, which is obviously oceans related, and how perhaps there was a connection between the nature impact side and that decision.
Absolutely. So I think one thing that our assessment did, and I would say it's not done, we're going to be redoing the assessment to a certain degree, going deeper into our value chain, but it helped confirm and alert us to those impacts that are happening deeper within our value chain, minerals being one of them, right? In order to use Salesforce, you need a computer or a phone to do that. We also have renewable energy commitments. You need minerals in order to create the renewable energy infrastructure, right? And so what we have been able to do is we know that those impacts and dependencies exist. Perhaps we can't address those components within our value chain right away, but there's other tools we have at our disposal, like advocacy. So earlier this year, Salesforce signed on to the deep seabed mining moratorium, which I think is just one example of us demonstrating, this understanding of where those impacts lie and taking steps to think about how do we address them. And I think one other example of that, as well as thinking about those supplier relationships. And I think the assessment was a very important foundational tool for thinking about how do we leverage those existing relationships that we already have. I saw one of the questions was kind of how much new data did you need versus bringing in old data? And I think that's, there's so many synergies. Whenever I talk about this topic, I talk about synergies, right? We were able to leverage a lot of what we had uncovered in doing our GHG accounting for years, in developing our climate program, to find those synergies. And just as we've established our relationships with our top suppliers from a GHG carbon point of view, we're able to tap into those relationships to bring in nature as a part of that conversation, which I think is really important. And I'm excited to see how the company can leverage the innovative ways that we've started leaning in with our suppliers. Like we have a contract that holds them accountable to setting science-based targets and then compensating if they fail to meet those. So it's exciting to think about what we might be able to do within the nature space as well.
Thank you, Julie. I think that's a really interesting example. And I noticed that Emilio raised his hand, so perhaps he wants to build on that.
Yeah, just regarding the data topic, it is true that we're going to need a lot of data. And these new reporting frameworks will enforce the development of these databases and the evolution. I mean, of course, there are differences in the quality depending on the region where you are on the topic that you want to look into. But I mean, there is data already available to do a lot of assessments. So we don't have to use the excuse of the data, the lack of data, for not doing our assessments. It's very, very important to assess our impacts and dependencies of nature. for many companies, dependencies on nature are huge. And if they are not aware of those, they might find terrible situations in the medium term. And impacts also create risks for us. So that's what I wanted to say. I mean, there is data to do initial assessment. This data will be refined over the years and will be improved, and more evaluation algorithms and assessing procedures and so will appear, and there is science behind this, and academia and research institutions are behind trying to develop new ways of evaluating the status of nature. And so again, go ahead and do it. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Emilio. I think that's an important build. And I guess looking to some more of the questions that we received, over to you, Ankit, if I may. I think an interesting question perhaps you can reflect on as Mahindra Group cutting across 8 to 9 different business verticals in a $50 billion business is the extent to which investors have either influenced or informed your approach to this. To what extent have they had a driving force, and how perhaps are they influencing your thinking in this space?
Definitely. So, Mairead, I'll actually take 2 very specific examples. So, over the last 18 months, there have actually been 4 major investors, and all of these impact investors. So, Canada Pension Plan, OTPP, Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, British Institutional Investors, IFC, Temasek, all of them, known generally for their impact investing, have invested into different parts of the Mahindra Group. The second thing that I'll mention is that just a couple of months back, the World Economic Forum actually released a case study on transparency and disclosure, specifically with respect to stakeholder capitalism metrics and how that has impacted different businesses, and where they talked about the Mahindra Group. So between these two, what we see is that investors are increasingly caring about this, and caring about this in a big way, while their asks are still not very specific in terms of, you do X, Y, and Z, but they are extremely, conscious of what are we doing, and that is a great motivator for them to engage with us. In fact, very often the investors are relying on us to tell them that what are the things that they should be looking at in their other portfolio companies. And I would not talk only about nature specifically in that conversation, because they generally have a slightly more broader overview in terms of the entire ESG impact, especially on the intersection of E and S. So in areas, if I again relate it back to the examples that I talked about, so in the agriculture sector, in the EV sector, in the tree plantation, afforestation work that we do, they are specifically conscious of the areas where it leads to greater social outcomes as well. So, for instance, all the work that we do on afforestation has a significant impact on about 26,000 farmers that are involved in this program. Similarly, all the work that we do on sustainable agriculture has an impact in terms of increasing the income levels of all the farming community, and it's generally the more marginalized community in the country. Similarly, I think on the EV bit and on the solar side of things, in both those areas, just transition or skilling of the MSME sector as well as workers is something that is really important to them. So I think overall the theme that investors are caring about is that how do you, with your businesses, create demonstrable scale positive environmental and nature impact, and at the same time also social impact. And those stories are something that they really appreciate. So maybe with that I'll pause.
Really, really helpful. Thank you for that, Ankit. And I would like to suggest a open question actually to all of you. So whoever wants to pick this one up, but a question coming through on what was your experience in building out your TNFD solution from TCFD? How do you, and also linked to that, how do you find the interoperability with other nature and biodiversity related reporting standards like CSRD? Is there anyone who would like to pick that question up?
Well, I could say a couple of words. I mean, the energy companies have been under heavy pressure on regulatory pressure for quite a while. So we are maybe in a better situation to address these matters. But our understanding from TNFD and CSRD, I would say that they are more or less similar. I mean, if you go through your LEAP assessment, which is the assessment framework that the TNFD is suggesting, that will give you a lot of information and insight for you to address CSRD's requirements. There might be differences in the way they request particular information or such, but they are all coming through this road of understanding your dependencies and impacts, and then your risks and opportunities, and what is the governing process within the company that manages all of that. And then the indicators and the KPIs are, well, there's only so much you can ask. So they are similar, I would say. Of course, they will have their differences, but I mean, if you do one of these assessments, you will be in a very good position to address these and other reporting frameworks that are coming.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emilio. And over to you, Julie.
Completely agree with what Emilio was sharing. And I think for us, we're working with the same analysts on the climate side who helped support our TCFD report generation. We're working with the same stakeholders in finance who also worked on that. So those, as I was saying before, those relationships are there, and the relationships being there is absolutely critical for then doing some of the deeper analysis that TNFD requires, right? And additional expertise you can bring in there if necessary from external consultants. There's a lot of great folks out there to help pull meaningful insights from the different data sets that you're bringing in. But I think there are so many synergies, and it's great, in my opinion, that TNFD worked so closely with TCFD to make sure that alignment was there. And the other thing I was pleasantly surprised by, and perhaps not surprised, but it was great to see that in ESRS E3, E4, a lot of similarity between what TNFD is asking you to do and the information that CSRD is asking you to report. I felt much more comfortable after having done our nature assessment to be in a position where if we need to disclose against those different components, we're going to be able to. And I think, again, as Emilio was saying before, there's data and information out there that is ready to use. If you wait until the last minute to do those assessments, that I cannot imagine how painful of a process that would be for companies. Those that start earlier are going to have a much, from a kind of organizational point of view, it's going to be a smoother, easier process, I'd imagine. And you'll be able to actually do something with the insights that you uncover, which at the end of the day is what is most important, right?
Absolutely. And I think that, Ankit, you were also raising your hand to maybe build on that point. So over to you.
Sure. So I actually wanted to share a slightly different perspective. So being headquartered and based in India, the regulatory ecosystem here works a bit differently. So there's something called BRSR that is more of a mandatory requirement where many of these aspects are being brought together. So we are actually playing a role in terms of working with the regulator to make sure that it's more and more aligned with some of the global reporting standards, be it voluntary or voluntary or mandatory at the global stage. That's one. The second thing is, and I know someone posted on the chat as well, we have been working very closely with the Business+Nature team as well to sort of work with them on how to build a more practical guide for action going industry by industry, because the other challenge that we face, and I'll be very candid about this, is there's always challenge on both bandwidth and resources. So we want to make sure that we use our resources on the most valuable area, and how do we are able to create impact on ground with the minimum amount of resources. So keeping that principle in mind, I think what we are trying to do is work with the teams to already figure out certain areas which are common to the industry rather than an individual company, and then start from a slightly mature starting point. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is that, again, with our partnership with the World Economic Forum, we are working with the ISSB team to pick the relevant portions from TNFD, for that matter, and a couple of other global standards. And identify the ones that would be most relevant for us from a global perspective, not for just us, but for, let's say, the wider industry as a whole. So I think that's the 3 exercises on the reporting and disclosure specifically.
I think that's a really, really important point around those differences. And I just looking at there's been a few other questions that have come through. We have covered many of them. We have run out of time, I think, for further questions, but we have really, I think, covered a really broad terrain. And I think also what's really come to life is some very common themes in terms of where business is at and how businesses are approaching it, but also some very distinctly different aspects depending on the sector, depending on the geography, and depending on also business culture, quite frankly, as well. So I think hopefully for those on the call today, it's given everyone really diverse perspectives where you can connect to different people based on what they're doing and where you are on your journey. And I think, Millie, if we can come to keeping everyone exactly spotlighted, but if we just sum up with one slide which we wanted to provide, just with some initial additional resources for those who are earlier in the journey. And actually, Millie, from our side, included the links for all of these in the chat box. So you can literally copy and paste from the chat box to make it even faster, and we'll send it out in the summary notes. But we included, of course, the Business for Nature Strategy Handbook, TNFD Getting Started, and SBT and Technical Guidance, and of course the sector actions towards a nature positive future, which is also a useful starting point. There's Salesforce's Nature Positive Strategy, which is useful to look at because it also has some additional guidance notes actually on the nature impact assessment and is open source. And we have our newsletter, which is not specific to impact and reporting, but looks at pioneering approaches for business on the subject of nature, and particularly looking at that in ways that drive really credible impact, but also create business value and customer value and engagement. And lastly, we have our Business and Nature episodes 1, 2, and 3, all available for replay if you have some extra time over the holidays and fancy that. You can find that, of course, on YouTube. So with that, we will just close, Millie, with one final slide, which has the QR code for our 5th and final episode, which is on the 11th of January. And it's on the subject of how can business constructively support and learn from local communities on nature, which is, of course, a critical piece of the puzzle. We'll send that link out in the follow-up notes. So I think if we can have all the panelists back on screen together, I'd like to thank all of you, Laura from Danone, Ankit from Mahindra Group, Julie from Salesforce, and Emilio from Iberdrola. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights. And thank you to everyone who joined today and for your questions. And thank you so much. And we'll see you for the next one.
Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.